Bechoros Daf Chaf. Our Gemara brings the Mishnah that we learned yesterday, and in addition to that brings other shitas, and the Gemara tries to explain what's the difference between all the shitas. Yesterday we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel says that if a person buys an animal from a goy, and we cannot trust the goy whether or not this animal gave birth, and therefore you are chayiv in a bechar or not chayiv in a bechar. If we're talking about a goat cannot give birth more than once in its first year, so therefore if it gave birth while the Jew owned it in its first year, then obviously it's a firstborn and Yechayev b'bchara. Past the first year, it becomes a suffix, says Rabbi Shmuel. Ask the Gemara, why is it a suffix? If most animals give birth in the first year, then obviously it's a vadai that she gave birth, because a roiv is like a vadai, she gave birth, and therefore there's no suffix. So we had a pshat yesterday, and today Ravina says that this is considered a roiv that needs to come on to an exterior factor, because in order to get pregnant, she needs a male, and therefore it's not similar to like we had yesterday where most small children grow up not to be sterile. You don't need an external factor for that. That's a natural growth within. But over here, to get pregnant, you need an external factor, and therefore you don't use roiv. Says the Gemara, one more shita, Rabbi Shua Gamre. Rabbi Shua said in the name of his Rabbeim. And then later on, there's Rabbi Shua Savre, he said in his own name. Said in the name of his Rabbeim, they're mechulek on Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel says we could prove from the fact that she gave birth that it's a firstborn. Well, wait a minute, what about miscarriages? Maybe there's a miscarriage. The Gemara is going to explain what that means and how they're mechulek. Rabbi Shua himself says that if she saw tinof, meaning there was blood, and you could say that it was a miscarriage, up until 6 months, she could still give birth in that first year. And the Gemara explains. What is the machlokes between Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Shmuel? Says the Gemara, it could be one of three things. Either they argue whether tinuf, seeing blood, and assuming that it's a miscarriage, that is considered a birth, but perhaps not even a birth. A birth is a full-term child. Or the machlokes is whether we didn't see the miscarriage, do we think that perhaps there was a miscarriage, and if there was a miscarriage, this is her second birth, and Rabbi Shua says, yes, we are concerned with that. Now, the Gemara brought before that Rava says that Rabbi Shmuel holds we have to be chayshish for a miyut. And some animals, a miyut animals, a minority of animals, have miscarriages. So why are we saying that it's Rabbi Shua that says that we go by the miyut? Rabbi Shmuel also says we go by the miyut. It says the Gemara, perhaps, when do we go by the miyut? To create a chumrah to make somebody give a bechar, such as in our Mishnah, that some of these animals don't give birth in the first year, so even if she gave birth in the second year, perhaps it's a bechar, and we force this guy to have a suffix here. But you don't say miyot, maybe, when it's a kula. Over here we want to say that some animals miscarry, and if they miscarry, that's considered the first birth, and we're using that miyot to say that they're patur from a bechara. That we don't do. Third way to learn the machlokes between Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Shmuel is when we see that she gave birth, is that proof that what we saw earlier, what we thought was a miscarriage, is in fact not a miscarriage. That's the machlokes. What's the difference between Gamre and Sfari, what Rabbi Shua said in the name of his Rebbes, and what he said himself? Also three pshatim in the Gemara. There's Zeiri. Zeiri says that once an animal miscarries, it cannot conceive for 30 days because it simply won't allow itself to mate for 30 days. Is that true or not? That's the machlokes. What's the difference? So let's say an animal, as you see in the chart, had a miscarriage on the first day of the 7th month of her life. So according to Ziri, she cannot conceive until the first day of the 8th month of her life, until she's 8 months old. But and an animal like this, like a goat, is pregnant for 5 full months. So when will she give birth? On the first day of her second year of life. Well, the second year of life is not a right that she didn't give birth before, because a goat could only give birth once in her first life, but now she just gave birth in her second year. So maybe she gave birth before. But if you don't hold of Ziri, then you don't have to wait 30 days. So if she miscarried on the first day of when she was 7 months old, she could have conceived a day later. And Memela, she would have given birth within her first year. Another way to learn the machlokes is whether or not an animal gives birth, lemikutar, does she give birth before 5 months? Rashi brings a Gemara in Nida that says that the word heroyon, pregnancy, is Gematria 271. Now, we know that a woman is pregnant for 9 months. 9 times 30 days is 270. Says the Gemara, she gives birth the day after 270. So an animal who's pregnant for 5 months will give birth 5 months in a day. And that's the machlekes here. Does she only give birth 5 months in a day, or perhaps even less? The third way to learn the machlekes is even less than that. Machlekes is, do we count part of a day, a partial day, as the whole day or not? That's the machlekes. What's the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yeshua? Says the Gemara, if we find an animal that's nursing, does that indicate to us that she gave birth? According to Rabbi Akiva, it's not a raya that she gave birth, and therefore it's a suffix. And according to Rabbi Yeshua, it's valid that she gave birth, and therefore, and we're not choishish for the minority who are able to nurse even though they didn't give birth. And we find a similar halacha that Rabbi Yeshua says, a yavama, she lost her husband and she fell to Yibum. Now she doesn't have a brother-in-law, as far as she knows, but she has a mother-in-law who's of childbearing age. So the halacha is, if the last time she saw her mother-in-law wasn't pregnant, there's no reason to be chayshish. But if when she saw her mother-in-law last, she was pregnant, according to Chachamim, we have to be concerned. Maybe her mother-in-law gave birth to a boy, and therefore she can't marry anybody else. But according to Rabbi Yeshua, we don't have to be concerned that she gave birth to a boy, even though she's pregnant. Half pregnancies are females, and there's a percentage of pregnancies that end up in a miscarriage. So let's say there's 51% that are not males, only 49% are males, and 49 we're not chayshish for the miyut, says Rabbi Yeshua. Says the Gemara halacha, if one goat gave birth to 3 goats, and those 3 goats gave birth to triplets as well, so you have a total, the grandmother has 12 offspring, those 12, you put them in the pen and you let them out for Meiser, as long as they were born within 1 year from Elul to Elul, according to Reb Meir. Reb Shimon says, I saw this with my own eyes, and the Gemara is going to explain tomorrow how he's mechulik. And the Gemara says, you can't say that the triplets gave birth to twins, and therefore you have 9, and then the grandmother gave birth to another 1. Because the grandmother, even if you hold that you could give birth after you have a miscarriage, you can't give birth after you gave birth a full normal pregnancy. And therefore, we have to say that the triplets had triplets. Have a wonderful day.